Good morning. I want you to each know that the Lord loves you very much. And each and every one of you, I don't care what you think about yourself, to the Lord, you're very special. And his love for you is not determined by the amount of sin you might have in your life. When his son, Jesus Christ, came and offered up his life on the cross, it was for you. Each and every one. Before I get too far into the message this morning, I want to say, Sister Hazel, I'm really glad you're here because I was needing to get a hold of you anyway. I've got some trees over at my house that I'm going to need some help pruning this spring. And I was hoping that maybe I could get you to come over and give me a hand. In case you don't know, Sister Hazel kind of began to encounter some health problems after she took a tumble off the ladder in her front yard while she was pruning her trees. So I thought with that expert kind of help, we'll get by. So it's great to see you here, hon, and we welcome you in our midst again. Our theme this month, I think, is a very powerful theme, and I want to share it with you. It's walk in the ways of truth and soberness, love one another and serve one another. And I want to read just a few of the scriptures which accompany that theme. The first one I want to read is from Mosiah. And in the second chapter of Mosiah, the 24th verse, we find these words, "And ye will not have mind to injure one another, but to live peaceably, and to render every man according to that which is his due." And then in verse 27, as our brothers already shared, "In admonition to us as we rear our children, but ye will teach them to walk in the ways of truth and soberness. Ye will teach them to love one another and to serve one another." From Galatians, the 5th chapter, beginning in the 13th verse, "For brethren, ye have been called unto liberty. Only use not liberty for the occasion to the flesh." I think about that, and I'm going to digress for just a moment here. I think about that, and I realize the liberty that we have when we get out on the highway in our cars. There's a little sign along the road that says you're supposed to drive 70 miles an hour. But of course, you're at liberty to drive at a different speed. Now, there may be consequences for you taking that liberty. And part of our use of that liberty is how it affects those around us. Whether you're driving 35 in a 70-mile-an-hour zone or whether you're driving 95. You can do that because in this nation you have the liberty to do that. Now, in one case you may get rear-ended, and in the other case you may get pulled over and taken to jail. But you still have the liberty. It's just that as we utilize the liberty that God has given us, there are consequences. And so in this verse, as we look at what it says, "Ye are called unto liberty." And then it comes with this admonition. "Only use not liberty for an occasion to the flesh, but by love serve one another." In other words, as we use our liberty, it should be in love and service to one another. Another way to put that might be, you're free to help and love one another. And then in the 14th verse it says, "For all the law is fulfilled in one word, even in this, And as Brother David pointed out this morning in the priesthood service, I think probably what Paul really meant here is the law is fulfilled in this one thought. Even this, thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. Behold, in 2 Nephi, the 11th chapter, behold, hath the Lord commanded any that they should not partake of his goodness? Behold, I say unto you, nay. But all men are privileged, the one like unto the other, and none are forbidden. And then in the next verse, he speaks about priestcraft. And then in verse 107, he brings out this thought. Behold, the Lord hath forbidden this thing, that there be priestcrafts. Wherefore the Lord hath given a commandment, that all men should have charity, which charity is love. And then in Moroni, the 7th chapter, we find these words. Wherefore cleave unto charity, which is the greatest of all. For all things must fail, but charity is the pure love of Christ, and it endureth forever. And whosoever is found possessed of it, in the last days it shall be well with them. And then finally in John, the 13th chapter, beginning in verse 34. A new commandment I give unto you, that ye love one another. As I have loved you, that ye also love one another. And by this shall all men know that ye are my disciples, if ye have love one for another. I want to share with you a story that I found a while back. It's a story about a young lady. Her name is, for the purpose of the story, we'll call her Sally. And a young lady named Sally relates an experience that she had while she was in a seminary class given by her teacher, Dr. Smith. She says Dr. Smith was well known for his elaborate object lessons. One particular day, Sally arrived at the seminary and knew that they were in for a fun day. On the wall in the classroom was a large target. And on a table nearby, there were a stack of darts. Dr. Smith told the students to draw a picture of someone they disliked or someone who had made them angry, and he would allow them to throw darts at the person's picture. So Sally's girlfriend drew a picture of a girl who had stolen her boyfriend. Another friend drew a picture of his little brother. I wonder why. Sally drew a picture of a former friend putting great effort into the details of her face. Sally was pleased with the overall effect she had achieved. The class lined up and began throwing darts with a lot of laughter and hilarity. Some of the students threw their darts with such force that they began to rip the target. Sally was looking forward to her turn and was filled with disappointment when Dr. Smith, because of time limits, asked the students to please take their seats. As Sally sat thinking about how angry she was because she didn't get a chance to throw any darts at her target, Dr. Smith began removing the target from the wall. Underneath the target was a picture of Jesus. The room fell silent as each student viewed the mangled picture of Jesus. Holes and jagged marks covered his face, and his eyes were pierced. Dr. Smith said only these words, "Inasmuch as you have done it unto the least of these, my brethren, ye have done it unto me." No other words were necessary. The tear-filled eyes of each student focused only on the picture of Christ. if we were to make application of that to our own lives and the darts that we throw at others, sometimes verbal, sometimes only in our minds, I wonder if we really take count of who's being hit by those darts. I want to share a story, or actually, it's more than a story, it's a testimony, I guess, of a man who was a friend of mine for a number of years. His name, I'll just call him John today. I knew John for quite a few years, and at one point he got in trouble with the law. There was accusations made against him, which were fairly serious accusations, and as a result of that, he was arrested and put in jail, and he couldn't afford his bond, so he stayed in jail for about a year, waiting trial. And in the course of that year, the person who had made the allegations on which he'd been arrested changed their story 3 or 4 times as to what had happened. And eventually, while he was spending this year in jail, he became ill and was diagnosed with cancer. But because he was a ward of the county at the time, they wouldn't provide him any medical care, so he couldn't get any treatment for the cancer. Eventually, his trial date came up, and he had a trial, and he was acquitted because there was simply no evidence. But he had spent a year of his life in jail. I went down to visit John a number of times in jail during that year, and we visited about a lot of things. But never once did I hear him say a cross word or a harsh word about the person who'd made the false accusations against him. And never once did I hear him say a harsh word about the system that was keeping him in jail without medical care. And so after the trial was over and he was acquitted, he moved down to the southern part of the state and began to go to doctors to get treatment for the cancer. Unfortunately, by the time he got out of jail, the cancer had grown in his groin to about the size of a grapefruit. And he had surgery on his cancer, and they attempted to remove as much of it as they could. But one of the things that it did is it impaired the nerves to his leg. And so when the surgery was over and he came out of the anesthetic, the doctors told him, we removed as much of the cancer as we could, but you won't be able to walk anymore because we had to cut the nerves to your leg. Well, John said, well, I'm going to be able to walk. And so he set his mind to being able to walk. And he worked on it while he was in the hospital, and he worked on it afterward, and he got to the point where he could go for hikes. But the cancer wasn't all removed, and so eventually he began to suffer the consequences of that illness and became very ill, suffered a lot of pain, and had an opportunity to go down and visit with him shortly before his death. And we went down and visited with him, and he still had not a cross word to say to anyone who had been involved in the taking of his life. And a couple of weeks after I visited with him, he passed away. So I went down for his memorial service. And at the end of the memorial service, they played a video that John had made. He had, just a few days before his passing, he had taken his phone and he had gone out to the cemetery. And he had stood out in the cemetery and he'd made a video for the people who would be attending his funeral service. There was no anger in him at all. But there was concern for everyone who would hear his words. And so he spent about 10 minutes making a recorded time, making this video, admonishing each one of us who would hear those words to be alive in the Spirit of God. And how very important it was that we maintain a relationship with our Heavenly Father and that we be alive in Him. I have no idea whether he committed the crime that he'd been charged of, and that really isn't relevant. Did you notice in the scriptures when he tells us to visit those in prison, he doesn't say visit the innocent in prison? I guess that means he really loves those who are imprisoned, regardless of if they've made a mistake or not. Just like he loves you and I, regardless of whether we have made mistakes or not. We could ask ourselves, does anyone mistake you for Jesus Christ? Probably Earl gets mistaken sometimes. I won't pick you out individually, Earl, so maybe Terry does too. That's really our destiny, isn't it? To be as much like Jesus Christ as we possibly can. So much like Jesus, maybe, that when people look at us, they can't tell the difference because of the life that we're living and the way we are interacting with the world. If we claim to know Him, we should live and walk and act like He would live and walk and act. Knowing Him is more than simply quoting Scripture and going to church. It's actually living the Word as life, and as life unfolds each day. You know, we've often heard, at least I have, life is short, you better enjoy it. Anybody heard that? How many of you have heard, eternity is long, better prepare for it? Funny the emphasis that the world places on things, isn't it? Better hurry and enjoy these 50 to 100 years you're going to have here, because it's going to be over. Very little attention is given to all eternity, which then comes next. And so we need to look at maybe where our priorities are at and those things that are truly important. I have a friend who wrote a little, and it's kind of a poem, but kind of just a little thing to think about. And so I want to share that with you here this morning. Dear God, every day I wake up thinking I did so by choice, or most days because I just had to wake up, instead of thinking of the gift that you've given me called life. Do you ever get tired of seeing us waste each day, each gift that we call the present? Do you ever get tired of giving us another day to show the world your love, but instead we show the world anger, jealousy, and hatred? Dear God, how many times do you follow us into the darkness and shine your light to show us the way out? And we turn away and tell you, not right now, God. I'll be back on Sunday. Dear God, are you tired of the bandwagon fans who only call your name when life is bad? But when we're doing great, we seem to forget who got us to this point. How long before the world realizes that when we are ready, you will already be there waiting? When will the world see that you are our Father and not a slave driver? When will they see that you call us son or daughter? You don't call us used or broken. Dear God, when will the world see that your love never fails us, even when we fail you? When will the world see that all we need is less of us and more of you? When will the world see how beautiful it could be, dear God? I was reading through some material thinking about this sermon, and I looked at something I had saved a year or so ago. And it's a quote from a governor of one of the states during the COVID virus. Our behavior stopped the spread of the virus. God didn't stop the virus. Any of you remember that quote? We stopped it. God didn't. And that's kind of where we have come as a nation. We've done our level best with the aid of Satan to remove God. But we know that when our country was birthed, its foundations and laws were based on biblical laws and principles. We used to be one nation under God. Now we're a nation that has turned its back on God, and history shows that when a nation does this, their end is near. As we seek to walk in this life, here's a little rule for you to remember. Give Satan an inch, and he will be a ruler. You'll have to think about that one a minute. Many of us want to serve God, but only in an advisory capacity. We don't change the message of the Lord, even though we have tried so many times and still try to do today, and as this world has done. We don't change the message. It's the message that's supposed to change us. Now, I want to read to you for a closing thought from Mosiah, the 2nd chapter. I know we're going to have a moment of meditation, and so perhaps you can think on this. Mosiah, the 2nd chapter, I'll begin with verse 20. Even so I would that you should remember and always retain in remembrance the greatness of God and your own nothingness, and his goodness and long-suffering towards you, unworthy creatures. And humble yourselves even in the depths of humility, calling on the name of the Lord daily, and standing steadfastly in the faith of that which is to come, which was spoken by the mouth of an angel. And behold, I say unto you, that if ye do this, ye shall always rejoice, and be filled with the love of God, and always retain a remission of your sins. And ye shall grow in the knowledge of the glory of him that created you, or in the knowledge of that which is just and true. And ye will not have a mind to injure one another, but live peaceably, and to render to every man according to that which is his due. May the Lord bless you as you continue this walk. May we continue this walk in love and peace for one another.